Up next in our 2021 offensive breakout player discussion, Vince, we are going to go back to the offensive line. So who is your third breakout player for the Notre Dame offense heading into 2021?
So this player, you could say he was a rotation player, but he wasn't really a rotation player. He was a two-deep player who had to jump in when there was an injury. And when he did, before he got injured, I thought that he played, very, very, very well. And that's Zeke Correll at center. And I think since you and I both believe that Jared Patterson will be moving out of the center position over to left tackle, at the very least to guard, the staff should feel very comfortable with Zeke Correll taking over the center position. And, he's a top 100 player, I do believe, coming in. I mean, everybody was worried when Jared Patterson went down as to who was going to take his place. And you and I were like, well, pump the brakes. Like, Zeke Correll's a pretty darn good player, even though we haven't had a chance to see him on the field yet.
Right.
And you saw the first game that he took over. There was a little bit of a step back without Jared.
Which is going to happen when one of the three or four best centers in the entire country isn't playing.
Absolutely. But there was continuity. There was no bad snaps.
Yeah.
It was a good situation. And then, of course, he went out and Josh Lugg went in. And Josh Lugg's not a center. So I'm not knocking Josh Lugg. He's a 6'7" dude. You don't see a lot of those guys at center. And then so there was some issues. And then when Zeke Correll went back in, no more issues. So I think he's poised and ready to take over that spot. I think that even though he'll be a first-year starter from a full-time standpoint, he is going to be one of those guys that you can count on starting in game one. I mean, you're going to have Josh Lugg, you're going to have Jared Patterson, and not far behind those two guys is going to be Zeke Correll. He's a guy that I am not worried about moving forward. I'm actually excited to see what he brings to the table. So he falls under that category of kind of a rotation guy that is going to be a solid starter moving forward. And then he could eventually end up taking that next step as well. But for 21, I see him as just that solid guy we're not going to talk about very often because of how solid he's playing, because, of course, that's what you want from an offensive lineman. I see him being that guy in that role.
I think from a talent standpoint, you're spot on. And I wrote about Zeke in the breakout article that I had for irishbreakdown.com because the talent's there. I mean, we saw it. I mean, even in some of the struggles he had at times against Alabama, it was against Christian Barmore, who's an elite player. And it was one of those things where you're like, he's younger, he's going to have another year in the weight room, and they were kind of experiential, technical things that can be cleaned up, not quite reacting to things as quickly.
He was a little late getting over on a double team one time.
Right, which is going to happen for a guy that has so little experience. I think those things are going to get worked out because of all the reps he's going to get this spring and in fall camp, and that's the ideal thing. The only hesitation I have about Zeke Correll being that breakout player is just health. He's got to prove he can stay healthy. I mean, again, the reason he didn't stay at center is because he got hurt.
Yeah, right.
And I've heard he's had a couple things happen during his first couple years that he would miss a week here, miss a few practices there. So, he has to be healthy because you have to have a center that's dependable. I mean, you can't go through where you're having to rotate your center 2-3 times a year because the other guy just keeps getting banged up. I mean, that's a tough situation to be in. But if he can stay healthy and stay on the field, I think Zeke Correll could be an outstanding player. And look, he's going to be a year older in a year extra in the system, stepping into the starting lineup than Jared Patterson was. Zeke's going to be a redshirt sophomore. Jared Patterson stepped into the lineup as a redshirt freshman. So, even though the opportunities were limited prior to him stepping in the starting lineup, he's a talented player, and he's going to now be in his third year. So I think that's going to help him add the size that he needed to add and the strength that he needed to add. And I could definitely see him, if healthy, having a breakout year. I mean, he's a very talented blocker. Another guy I wanted to ask you before we move on to your fourth guy, I wanted to ask you about this one, Vince, because this was a tough one that I thought long and hard about and that's Josh Lugg. I think he started 5 games as a redshirt sophomore in 2018-19 in place of Robert Hainsey. This year, I don't think he looked as good as he did in 2019 because I don't think he was playing the position he's most comfortable at, which is right tackle. And even I thought he did well at guard against North Carolina for the most part. He was kind of up and down. He had some solid moments there. He was a little up and down. But, to me, he's a guy that if they can find a home for him and let him stay at one spot, and I think tackle's probably where he's most comfortable, He's a guy that I could see as being a bit of a breakout as well. Maybe not from the reason I hesitate to put him on the same level as Jarrett Patterson and Zeke Correll is because I don't know if he'll get the attention because he is a veteran player.
Right.
But I could see him doing quite well at right tackle if they leave him out there and being a guy that maybe isn't a breakout because he's not going to get that hype of, great player, but a guy that you look at and say, boy, he was just really steadily did his job all year. And what are your thoughts about, did Josh Lugg kind of come up in this conversation at all for you as you were kind of thinking about linemen to put into this breakdown?
Well, he did, and I think the reason that I shied away from him a little bit is because he is already that veteran. We know kind of what Josh Lugg is and who he is. You're right. He wasn't put in a great position this year having to go into center. And guard really isn't his spot either. Now, he does a decent job at guard, don't get me wrong, but when he was at tackle, that's when he really was able to excel.
That's where he was most comfortable. I think he could be a really good guard if given the opportunity to stay there.
Sure.
He's practicing at tackle, and then they throw him in at guard when they need him. So
I mean, look, he's the Sixth Man of the Year award. I mean, he's the guy that you can count on, that you're going to get good reps from no matter where you put him. But I think that his future is as a tackle, just based on his size and his measurements and things of that nature. I think he falls under the category that I kind of described for Zeke Correll, a rotational guy, a guy that you kind of know what you're going to get. And then once he's in the starting lineup, he's going to be that solid starter, maybe not somebody we're talking about a bunch, but a guy that you're going to be able to count on, week in and week out. And I think that that's a spot that Josh Lugg could take. Maybe it's just because he's been around for so long. Like, we've been talking about Josh Lugg for 3 years, but he's never been that day one starter. So technically he falls into this category. It's just, I guess I kind of mentally dismissed him.
Because he's going to be a fifth-year senior, right?
He's been around forever, man. Yeah, exactly.
And he has played. I mean, he's played a lot. So it's kind of like, he's kind of already established. There's also a thought of maybe he's already established a little bit to a degree because of how well he played in 2019, in those 5 games when Robert Hainsey got hurt.
He's established in a good way. Like, we don't have it's not like we're thinking about him kind of like a Javon McKinley going into last year. Like, he does great against those MAC teams, but what's he going to do in the big games?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we know he can play.
Yeah, but I do think there is actually a little bit of something to that because you look at the 5 games he played in 2019, they weren't against very good competition.
Okay.
I mean, it was Duke, it was Navy, it was Boston College, it was Stanford and Iowa State. I think the best team in that group was Navy, and then this year he starts against Syracuse and North Carolina, and I don't think played necessarily great again those games. And then against Clemson, he didn't play well at all. But I think that had more to do with him playing out of position.
Agreed.
I think the reason I would hesitate to pound the table for Josh Lugg being on this list is I think the uncertainty of where he is going to play. Because I think you and I would agree. You made the point, Vince, for me is if he's at right tackle, then my conversation about Josh Lugg is going to change. If he's a guard, I'm more hesitant I need to see it.
Sure.
Because like you said, even though I think he can play guard, he hasn't played guard to the level that he played tackle in 2019. And that's the discussion that we need to have. I will say this. If this breakdown was about who needs to step up and have a big year,
that's a different conversation.
He's in that conversation.
Absolutely.
They need Josh Lugg to step up and solidify a position, whether it's right guard, right tackle. They need him to step up and say, and not start because he's a veteran, but start because, wow, he had a great spring and a great fall camp, and we're ready for him to kind of step in and be that next guy. He needs to do that, because if he can do that with Zeke in the middle, with I was going to say Liam Eichenberg. I wish. With Jarrett Patterson at left tackle, now you start feeling really good about, okay, this line's got a chance to do something. But that's only if Josh Lugg grabs hold of a starting job and isn't starting because he's just the most experienced player and the other guys aren't ready. Right. So I think he'd be near the top of the who has to break out or who has to step up this offseason.